So let's see if this works, because it's suggesting that it's having trouble with the thumbnail, which is the very first part of shooting a video. So if it's having trouble with the thumbnail, it's going to definitely be problematic with something else, I'm sure. We're probably going to get a signal drop notice here tonight. So let's move on. So if you're just joining us, this is a series that I've been working on, a couple of series actually. So I've always been under the opinion that any two creative people given the same working material to start with will come up with entirely different ideas for their creations. And so in an effort to explore that concept, I like to take existing pop culture ideas, break them down to their constituent components, and then come up with ideas using those components that are not the same as the original work. Now, I did a series of these ideas earlier this year where I took pop culture concepts from well-known series. I think I did 9 of them. Things like Ghostbusters and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And then I broke them down into their constituent components and then put them together to create something new. Sometimes I got more than one story idea that were different from each other and different from the original idea. So I made my notes, I made my videos, and a few weeks after I had finished that round of 9 ideas, the computer crashed and obliterated everything that I'd worked on. But I do have the recordings that I made when I did it that I can go back and review. And I'm kind of curious to get back to checking out some of those things, if for no other reason than to go check out some of the ones we haven't gotten to yet, because I think I kind of want to play with some of those. And I might add some new ones too. But I want to build that list out again to play with. And I haven't done that yet because I have been trying my very best not to contaminate a second round of doing this, because I don't remember a lot of what I did before. I'm not sure what we did for Stargate last time. I feel like it had something to do with superheroes, but I'm not sure. I can't remember what we did last time. But that was the perfect grounds for me retrying each of the 9 story ideas we did the last time, coming up with new ideas that are entirely different, but they're using the same building blocks. So that's what we've been doing. And I've had a fair amount of fun. And I think this round, I do think there's vague memories of what we did last time, and there's some of them that we did this time that are way better than we did last time. Of course, there are also some that are way better last time than they are this time. So, not that we can't take either of them and go just run with it and have a little bit of fun, but the Stargate sg-1 approach that we were working on last night, I feel like, and because I don't remember what we did last time, I can't say for sure whether it's better or not, because I don't remember, but I feel like maybe we did a little bit better this time. So, what are we working on this time? Well, this time is the story of I think the way I'm going to frame it now is with some of the ideas that occurred to me between last night and tonight. So we have these not stargates, but stone artifacts, essentially. And I like the idea of them being shaped like eggs. In this case, I think I might be going in the realm of geodes. So a geode, it's sort of hollow on the inside with crystals inside, but looks like a rock egg on the outside. And if you carve the exterior a little bit, get down into some of the lighter color stone, you can get sort of like a two-tone carved channel pattern into it. So the option of some of the artwork to be viable for that idea, I think it exists. That concept exists of being able to make the artwork a defining feature of this particular series run. So the artwork being an inspiration may be a factor of making this a graphic novel instead of a movie or a TV series. So with that in mind, I'm playing around with the idea of people who crafted these stone devices. Maybe they're not as clearly alien technology as they were made to be before. Now, the approach we're taking this round out is not traveling to other planets, but interacting with alien species. Alien in this sense being people from other realities. And those other realities may have beings that arose on Earth instead of us, or arose before us. And part of that lets us examine a race of beings that are like dinosaurs, but dinosaurs that became intelligent, maybe slightly humanoid species. So this is very similar to, I believe it's Lady Vasha from Doctor Who. And then that gives us room to play up another species that partially influenced by them to be the dragons instead of the dinosaurs. Here, let me get this. And then I'm looking at using them similar in fashion to the geodes used in Stargate SG-1, but not exactly, because the geodes infect human hosts, and I don't think that's where I want to go. Although, as I thought about it last night, one of the things we ended up just sort of barely touching on was the idea that you could have the dinosaurs able to create a drug from their own blood or something, or their bile or whatever they use, that can alter human beings. Because what I was aiming for that one was a little bit more along the lines of the Jaffa in Stargate SG-1. So being able to make a human into a slightly alien humanoid species by altering them toward your needs. That was one of the things I was looking to achieve with that. And the split between the Tok'ra and the Goa'uld was one of the other things I was hoping to achieve between the dinosaurs and the dragon folk. And so with that in mind, I was looking at the idea of the loss of the infectious monster, the Goa'uld being a hosted species, a species that parasitically attaches to human beings. That doesn't happen with this dragon dinosaur approach. So what do I have to do to make that work this way? So I was playing around with that idea a little bit further, and I think I do have an idea that would work. The thing we came across last night was doing a little bit more of a Last of Us fungal infection that takes over and dominates the species that they take over. and that's based off of the cordyceps fungus that turns ants into zombies. Now, you could do something similar with a Goa'uld style parasitic takeover that we could partially blame on the fungus and its ability to act as neurons and take over the minds of human beings. And so you have that happening on a parallel world, and you have dinosaurs on a parallel world, and then the dragons. I haven't decided whether or not I want the dragons to be on the same world as the dinosaurs, or if they're two very close worlds where one of them became benevolent and one of them became hostile. But I was debating at a certain point of wanting to find the third/fourth race. I do know that in the Stargate universe there were 4 races: the Asgard, the ancients, a race that created the Goa'uld, I believe, and then I believe the 4th one was the Nox, which showed up in an episode and then became part of the universe as existing. Now, I don't know that I care enough about the concept of the Nox to want to include something like that, but there's room for that to come into play later on. I think it was only within the first season or 2 that the concept of the 4 great races came up. And they may have only been named before they even came out with a concept of what to do with them and whether or not they still exist in the universe. So there's no hurry, there's no rush to get that solved. But having a Goa'uld Tok'ra pairing from the dinosaur and the dragon pair, and having the parasitic version of a creature being another species, I feel like that makes it so you can't get away with just having the Asgard and the Goa'uld as a 1 versus 1 and then throw the ancients in there a little bit later. That's that setup of Asgard, Goa'uld, ancients, and humans, or ancients, Asgard, Goa'uld, and humans as the 4 races that you see on the game, or the series. That works to a certain degree, but I feel like the way we're going with this is changing enough around between who the species are that we can get a little bit of a different angle, a different approach to it. I do want to have more than just the dragon, dino, infectious fungus. And so there's a part of me saying, like, well, maybe the dinosaurs created the gate system and that is where the egg shape came from. But I feel like that's not quite right, because to a certain degree, part of the reason I'm resisting that is because the dinosaurs are representing roughly the ancients and the Ori, but they are also responsible for creating the gate system in Stargate, and I want to shift that responsibility somewhere else. Now, the fungal species I don't think is the right way to go. I want them to be more savage. I want them to be sort of like, maybe like Wookiees, maybe like Klingons, something not technologically advanced, but not like stupid. It's just their life is, if you left them on a planet with stone weapons or no weapons at all, and just let them hunt and fight each other and scramble and destroy the environment they're a part of, they would do that. And they wouldn't feel a loss of anything for not having weapons or technology in advance of stones. And so they're sort of like the savage brutes, the barbarians, but a successful population of barbarians. And it's sort of a counter to the Star Trek Borg, I think. I don't want them to have a hive mind, but I do want it to be sort of like a ancestral memory component, which is what the Goa'uld had in Stargate, where they inherited the memories of their parents. But I do think there's room for the kind of intrigue and tribalism and the plotting and conquering approach to that kind of being. But the dinosaur and dragon population, I hatched on, pun intended, I hatched onto this idea last night. I think I had the inklings of it right as I was closing out the video. But the idea of the dragon / dinos as sort of an equivalent of Jedi. So in the expanded universe canon of Star Wars, the Jedi began, camera lost focus, began as a single organization that was studying and exploring the potential and aspects of the Force. And then somewhere along the way, some of them decided to use that Force to manipulate life and dominate and control it. And those people sort of formed a schism within the Jedi community, and that turned into a sort of a civil war. And that civil war ended up driving those people out into the universe as outcasts, where they landed on a planet full of beings who tapped into the dark side of the Force for what they did, and built an empire of conquerors and brutes. And those conquerors and brutes were known as the Sith. Now, the Dark Jedi interbred with them, so on and so forth, built their empire, learned some of their traditions, grew in strength with the plans to always get revenge on the Jedi who cast them out. That's where the idea of the Jedi and Sith come from, and the schism that happened between the two of them were foundational to the structure of the universe as it became in the movies and the series that came after that. I like the idea of being a monk-like society of reptilian beings that study and try to understand the nature of the universe and the multiverse, and certain sects within that community going towards a direction of enslavement and manipulation of beings. So they create their sort of drug-altered humans as servants and champions for them. And that sort of fits where I think I want to go with this. And so having like a Jedi group and a sort of Star Trek Borg-like group in the fungal species, I was trying to figure out what the other leg on this tripod of species was going to be. And as I explored this a little bit further, I just had this moment last night where I think it makes sense to me that I would like to do something so vastly different from most of what we consider to be life forms. And so where the dinosaurs are an alternate Earth where the dinosaurs never died out, and the cordyceps are essentially a alternate universe where some factor has come into play that created a species of infectious fungus that can use the brains of the beings it infects to learn and grow more intelligent, tap their memories, learn their skills, and take over, absorb, assimilate the minds and knowledge of the species that they absorb. And that may include at some point having the fungal infection take over a few of the dino population. Now, that sort of leaves not a lot of options. I could do something insectile. I thought about it, and I may leave room for that. But I think I can't remember how it just sort of landed in my brain, but I had this idea of like, what if this third species was non-carbon based? So a silicon-based life form, specifically crystals. And I got to thinking like, okay, so if we did this thing where we made these crystalline entities, it's not something we can say like, oh, it's just some alien invasion that happened on a different world. I want it to be something inherent in Earth. So I had this sort of notion of they're the ones that create the stone eggs, and crystals being things that can produce electrical shock and focus light and make lasers and do all those types of things. I got thinking like, yeah, their ability to manipulate things on an electromagnetic spectrum length may be what makes them the ones that created the gates to start with. The idea that they can focus gravity or energy or some other forces within the fundamental fabric of the universe may have given them an early start on creating technology and advancements. And if they started way earlier than humans existed, they could be really, really ancients. And exploring that idea further, like, okay, so how long ago would they have to be? Would they be the dominant life form before, like, we know what the geological history of the planet of the Earth is, and there weren't living rocks in the time before dinosaurs, or were there? My brain started playing around with the question, like, we think we know how the moon was formed. There was a small planetary body that did a sort of at an angle collision with Earth, and they destroyed portions of each other and threw up magma and chunks of molten Earth into a ring around it, which coalesced as molten globs into a sphere that formed our moon. That's how we think the moon happened. What if before that happened, there were crystalline, rock-based creatures, silicon-based creatures that began to establish a culture and a technological level of existence on Earth, and they were wiped out by that collision? But if in another universe that collision just missed, they maybe were able to continue. And the world not being wiped clean by them, being wiped out, potentially the tides didn't get involved with the moon, some of those other factors that may have stirred the development of carbon-based cellular life and eventually multicellular organisms didn't happen. So their world is Earth, but it's a world without a moon, and it's a world without tides. It's a world without organic life on it. And so I'm like, that's a very interesting twist on that. And so I got to thinking, okay, so we've got these silicon-based organisms that have the ability to adapt and maybe grow crystalline entities that they can plant as the doorways, sort of like if we planted trees. But these trees and these seeds and this mushrooms that they make out of silicon have a different look, and they interact with the energy of the universe differently. And I got to thinking, like, okay, so what are we going to make these silicon entities look like? You know, are we going to do Rock Hulk? Are we going to do the Thing from the Fantastic Four? No, I don't want to do that. I really don't want to do that. And then I got to really thinking, like, what if they take that concept of, I don't want to call it an egg, but a spheroid or an ovoid shape that has crystalline structures within and rocky structures on the exterior. And you can cultivate patterns within the exterior line work that goes through the rocky exterior to the crystalline entity within. But inside that, the crystalline aspects are what they use to direct light, force fields, anti-gravity, all these sci-fi elements they manipulate through their crystalline structure and the energy flows they move through them. So I got to thinking, all right, so if we did it as sort of like segmented plates, like the plates on an armadillo or the scales on a pangolin, but instead of doing them quite that way, we did it as plates of stone with etched patterns on the exterior, crystalline spikes on the interior, and the energy field that moves between these plates like this, binding the thing together into an entity. And that entity being able to hover by changing gravity through manipulation of the basic forces of the universe. So they float. You have this floating egg of these plates where you can see etched patterns on the exterior and glowing between the segments. And I got to thinking, well, if they can manipulate the base forces of the universe to shape light and energy, maybe they could project a pattern of a light being beneath it. And then I got to thinking, like, what if they make holograms? Holograms that can manipulate the environment they're in. And so this idea of almost like a jellyfish, but like a stone exterior jellyfish, able to cast a hologram, and it sort of makes them a shapeshifter. They can assume a form that looks like the people they're interacting with. But that hologram, because it's within their projection frame, can also touch and manipulate things with tractor beams and whatnot. And so it's sort of like a silicon life form developed holodeck technology from Star Trek as a natural ability. And they can hover and float above that or behind it. And so this is the extra race I thought would be interesting to do. And I have to admit, like, it's unique and different enough. And get this, we've got animals in Dinosaurs and Dragons. We've got, it's not really plants, but mushrooms or fungus on the infectious beings. And then we've got mineral. We've got animal, vegetable, or mineral as our trio. And I'm like, okay, that's funny how well that worked out. I think it works well enough that I'm going to run with it. And then with that idea going forward, I like the idea of them being not necessarily allies, but not enemies. And the dinosaur Jedi are not enemies and more likely to be allies. The dragons are likely to be foes. And the infectious fungus are just a dangerous threat. So that really sets up, I think, how I want the universe to be built. So these silicon entities built the gate network and established some of the basic things that built the universe around them. But they're not necessarily good people. It's not going to be as clear cut as the ancients and Stargate. And I kind of want them not to be obvious from the beginning as a interactive element. So I think really the trick to this is in Stargate SG-1, I believe the series gets started with the gate they thought led to only one world opens despite it's supposed to be sealed. And from there come more of the monsters from the movie, the Jaffa. And the Jaffa attack the base and extract certain persons that are going to be slave labor and potential hosts and take them back to another world. And the SG-1 team is brought in to try to fix this situation. And so it's a group of people on a rescue mission for some of their own people that were stolen and kidnapped. And they were kidnapped by the Goa'uld. Well, how are we doing this time? We're not going to necessarily set it up as a movie started out as, where you have a gate that was dug up and decoded, and they travel to the one other place the gate goes to, and it's another world where human beings have been kept as slave populations to one Goa'uld alien master who has a flying pyramid ship. They destroy the pyramid ship, they seal the gate from the other side and bury it, and that sort of was the end of the story until that gate opened and somebody kidnapped more people on Earth. I don't necessarily want to set that framework like that, and I kind of feel like I'm interested in not having it be a military organization that does this. So I wanted to explore that thought some more. I'm trying to figure out what makes the most sense. Like, if we're coming from the premise of the thing that is the gate in my story is the egg, the carved crystal, is it part of an art exhibit? Is it part of a museum? Is it part of Is it uncovered by treasure hunters? And it's important to make it a concept that brings into the fold the idea that this isn't travel to other worlds. This is alternate realities. And that's the hard part. That's because what we've built here is very sci-fi alien. And what we're aiming for here is very alternate reality. I feel like setting it up in this case as something the reverse of what happened before. Somebody from our world uncovers the device, not knowing what it was, and somehow ends up triggering it and ending up in another world, in another reality. And having wound up there, exploring, uncovering the population who are there, and maybe taking some of them with them back home to study, and somebody from those other worlds travels to our world to rescue the people we've taken. I think that kind of works. So let's put it in the frame of like you have I don't know, what would you run through it to make it power it? So somebody uncovers the crystal egg, we'll call it. Maybe it's I don't know. You have to start, like, I don't want us to be the bad guys necessarily, but I do want the story to involve us mistakenly causing an incident. And as a consequence of that, I think it's important at the end of the story, because in Stargate SG-1, you have them go fight the false gods, and the character of Teal'c is a servant of one of these false gods who's awoken to the fact that his god is false. And he then sides to overthrow that false god with the main characters, who are a military group on Earth. Now, if we're doing something similar, we don't want that exact narrative, but we do want the idea of maybe the group that comes to the rescue negotiates with some part of our population to establish a member of their group with our population to advise them in their journeys through the gates, to prevent more of the circumstances that happened the first time we ventured through the gate. Now, we could set it up as an accidental activation of the gate, or activation done unintentionally. either through focused light or, there's part of me that's kind of curious along the lines of finding the egg and trying to scan the interior of it and running it through an MRI or something like that would generate enough power and focus it on the core of it to activate it. And once it's activated, approaching it and finding yourself walking away from it at the same time until such a moment as you come to your senses in another place. And you're going to encounter other people. And they're going to be human people in that other place. But perhaps it's established that the gates on the other world that they arrive on are sacred spaces where people don't go without sort of the guidance of their dragon princes or something like that. But we arrive there and we end up seeking out where we are. We see all the clues that indicate it's Earth. So everything seems to suggest it's Earth, because while the dinosaurs weren't wiped out, the plant life continued to evolve as well. So it's much more like our plant life than dinosaur plant life. They've got a moon. You should theoretically be able to recognize the geography of the place you're in. And you'd encounter humans who maybe didn't come from that world, but at a certain point in the past were brought there. And if we're dealing with dinosaurs who have developed advanced technology and a sort of monastic tradition of something, not quite the Force, but maybe by studying their gate, they've gained an understanding of some of those fundamental forces of the universe that they've learned to manipulate technologically. And it looks mystical. Okay, so that's an idea. So if we go forward with that idea, humans arrive on their world and encounter somebody using technology different from our own, and sort of coax them with them, and then end up bringing them through to our side. But they would necessarily resist that to a certain degree. And then they get the person over to our side, and they're trying to uncover what happened and how the world is different. And so maybe it's sort of bring them to a lab. I don't know. That's a tricky one. I think that'll have to emerge as the story gets told. But as the story gets told, their Drac princes may send some people to rescue the person or persons that were abducted. And the encounter on our world will be one that sort of requires that we as a society start to examine the greater multiverse in a certain way. And so a task force may be set up for that. I'm thinking more along the lines of the early, one of the Star Trek series. There was a Star Trek Enterprise where they sort of deal with the repercussions of cracking the code to open warp drive to other worlds to humanity. And they consulted with a Vulcan consulate that gave them advice on how to go, and it was sort of like a prerequisite that crews would have a Vulcan among them as an advisor and sort of a watch guard for abuses of technology and breaking some of the rules that they agreed to. So taking that kind of approach to the further use of the gate and whatnot may allow for the introduction of a dinosaurian member to the group. And that can be sort of like the opening volley to uncovering the draconian population and their demon converts and the fungal parasites. Or do we go that far? I feel like this does sort of shift the narrative in a direction that makes the silicon-based species, almost a direct equivalent to the ancients. And I don't know that I want to take that path. So maybe maybe they encounter the silicon species as the second race that they encounter. And it's the parasitic fungal one that becomes the third one that they have to deal with. Yeah, so instead of starting with finding the Goa'uld, fighting the Goa'uld, finding the Asgard and the Tok'ra, the good Goa'uld, we're going to start you off with the dinosaur-dragon pairing. You start off with the dinosaurs. You're doing exploratory stuff, and you occasionally get pulled into the internal struggle and strife between the dragons and the dinosaurs. And the Asgard equivalent will be the silicon-based species. And perhaps there's going to be some not quite getting along between the silicon and the dinosaurs. And the silicon can be the tempters, the one who are willing to advocate for humanity being able to break free from the regulation of the dinosaurs. And perhaps there's some antagonism partly because the dinosaurs have been using things that the silicon species created. And then in the background, we can have the tensions between those two groups play out a little bit, but not be over eclipsing, not like a civil war or a conflict of any kind. It's more of a Cold War. And into the midst of that Cold War is maybe that manipulative group of the parasitic fungal species is seeding some of that conflict by having dinosaurian or draconian hosts, and they're able to infiltrate those groups and stir the pots to keep them distracted enough not to notice or take aim of the influences or populations of the fungal population. Now, there is a further element that I wanted to explore in that we don't have a lot of ways for humanity to become any of these beings. You have the fungal species can infect you. The dragon population can turn you into a demon. But I feel like the dinosaurian population may have an equivalent ability. And it gives the ability of humans to ascend to something more than human at a certain point. I've debated whether or not I want the dinosaurian population to actually be what happens when the dinosaurs used a similar technique to the dragons, and they just carried it further down that line until the humans that were converted became humanoid dinosaurs, and that their humanoid form allows one of them to be some of them to assist in human groups traveling through gate systems, but they consider themselves the children of the dinosaurs. But perhaps there exists still some existing dinosaurs, and they're off in another place. And I want to potentially play it along the lines of Dune, the sandworms of Dune, and the Prince Leto, son of Paul Atreides, became the god emperor of Dune by bonding with elements of the sandworms and becoming part worm himself. And so I'm wondering if I can play up on some of that for the dinosaurian aspect. So I think I might have what I need to go forward with this. And it's good enough that I think I can probably call it for tonight. I haven't decided what we're doing yet tomorrow, so I guess we'll leave that for a surprise. We're at about 54 minutes in, so it's a good place to call it. I want to thank you for joining me tonight. I need to get some rest because I still got some things I need to take care of tomorrow. But thanks for coming. Take care and have a good night. Type that up. Such a tangle of cords right now. There we go. Here, have a good night. Buenos noches, 再见.